In his gruff style with a grim face that hid his humor and heart, Mr. France would probably threaten to pull the plug on our production truck if he knew that on race day the story was about him. But the truth is, without him, race day probably wouldn't be a story at all. Bill France Jr. was the quiet, hard-working son of William and Ann France. He is best known as the longtime president of NASCAR, but history can report there wasn't a job he hadn't done or couldn't do when it came to the business side of racing. In January of 1972, Big Bill handed his son the wheel of stock car racing, and Bill Jr. took the sport to the front of the field. The younger France was never afraid to tweak this or that or torment the competitors if it improved the sport. He made the rules, he interpreted the rules, and he enforced the rules. Mr. France had secured the Winston brand of cigarettes as a series sponsor, but others were growing curious. Could they market their product on a race car? Mr. France was able to get their attention and their money. His sport was chastised as nothing but rolling billboards, but NASCAR sponsorship was the forerunner of rotating signs along the NBA sidelines and behind home plate, as well as commercial logos painted on professional hockey rinks and stadiums labeled with corporate names. He didn't apply for his job. His resume was his life. Bill Jr. lived the sport. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and perhaps most importantly, in his dreams. His title was president, but Mr. France was much more than that. He was the czar of the cars, the dictator of the radiator, and anything that was connected to it. Everyone knew his mission. Sunday was much more than a race. It was the show. He made no effort to hide his concern for competition, often modifying a rule just prior to a race if he thought it would improve the show. Even the biggest stars of the sport were not immune to his seemingly whimsical rulings. But while Mr. France controlled the race, he never lost the respect of the racers or their teams. They may not have liked the rules, but they were always clear on who was making them and why sometimes they were different on Sunday morning than they were on Saturday night. Mr. France drove racing out of the South and into the future, and while part of his dream remains unfulfilled, tracks outside of Los Angeles and rural Chicago, Homestead, Florida, Las Vegas, and Fort Worth, Texas, are a tribute not just to growth, but to gumption. Bill France Jr. had a moxie motorsports had never seen, and the willpower to match its horsepower. One of his biggest triumphs was his drive to power NASCAR past the flashy and futuristic cars of open-wheel racing in both popularity and prosperity. This was an accomplishment he credited to the fans, but it was Mr. France who managed to get the keys to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to show the world that NASCAR loves the Brickyard too, and the Brickyard loved it back. A Southern-based sport that celebrates the championship in New York City, multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns based on a simple startup strategy, a race car, and the man that drives it. The pride and patriotism of a nation saluted every Sunday, the France thumbprint. Bill France Jr. was a hard act to follow, despite the fact his business was simply going around in a circle. He had a vision for victory and the strength to finish the race. He was a son fortunate enough to carry on the motorsports daring and the drama created by his dad. Bill France Jr. raised the sport like it was his child, providing discipline and direction. It has grown up quite well. The fun fans have at the track comes from the work Mr. France did away from the track. To his family, our thoughts and prayers, and to him, our sincere thanks.